Welcome back to Gerrymandering by State, the video series where we look at how badly your state draws congressional districts. While the one-seat states may have been the easiest states to look at, the two-seat states could very well be the most difficult to criticize for how districts are drawn. Clearly, if a state is close to a 50-50 split, then you would expect a fairly drawn line to give you one congressperson of each party. But what do you do if the state is split 60-40 or 70-30? The formula I use to look at how many seats should be represented by each party is probably the weakest for these two-seat states. First, we will look at Hawaii. The first congressional district is centered on Honolulu on the island of Oahu. The second congressional district is the rest of Oahu and all other islands. It's not a crazy-looking district, and it seems to be only affected by population. But how does it fairly represent the entirety of the people of Hawaii? According to Ballotpedia, a 9-member commission draws all legislative district boundaries. The majority and minority leaders of the state House and Senate each select 2 members, and those 8 members select a 9th. Clearly the commission is bipartisan, and the lines drawn do not seem to be on its face to be done specifically to give one party an unfair advantage over the other. In the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump by a difference of 30% of the vote. If you look at the results of the people voting for Congress, the advantage is even more strongly supporting of the Democrats by a difference of about 38%. Each Democrat in their respective races got more votes than the Republicans in both races combined, so one could argue that Hawaii is fairly drawn. But for the purposes of this project, to figure out how many seats each party should have, I am taking the presidential candidate's percentage, multiplying it by the number of seats in the state, and rounding to the nearest whole number. Using this method, Hawaii should have 1 Democrat and 1 Republican, but it has 2 Democrats, so the state of Hawaii gives the Democrats a 1-seat advantage. Moving on to Idaho, the state looks pretty evenly drawn down the center. The line does waver a bit and cuts Boise in half. The state's redistricting process is bipartisan, and each party has equal say. Donald Trump won the state of Idaho by 30%, but Republicans won the state congressional votes by about 36%. If you add up all Democratic votes for Congress, they do have more votes than one of the Republican candidates, but since the number of overall Republican voters is more than double the number of Democratic voters, it also seems reasonable that the state would have 2 Republican congressional representatives. But using the same formula as before, technically Idaho should have 1 of each party. As such, the state of Idaho gives the Republicans a 1-seat advantage. Next is Rhode Island. The map doesn't look like it's drawn in a crazy manner, and the General Assembly draws the maps. A commission that is weighted towards the majority party may draw maps, but the Assembly is free to ignore them. Joe Biden won Rhode Island by 20%. But Rhode Island is interesting in that Democrats got just under 42% more votes statewide for Congress than Republicans, with 13% of the statewide vote going towards independent candidates, and no Republican candidate ran for the first congressional district at all. So while using the presidential formula gives us that each party should still have 1 seat apiece, there is no real issue in how the lines are drawn, and Rhode Island is probably the best representative of the 2-seat states. But since we are using a uniform formula across the board, we will still say that Rhode Island gives the Democrats a +1 seat advantage. Next comes New Hampshire. The congressional districts look evenly drawn. Congressional districts are drawn in a partisan manner, only needing a simple majority, but can be vetoed by the governor. Joe Biden won the state by 6%. Democrats won just under 8% more votes for Congress than Republicans. New Hampshire is a clear state where differently drawn lines could result in a more equitable share of the congressional representation. Of the 2-seat states, New Hampshire possibly contains the most unfairly drawn lines, and that is likely because those lines can be drawn without the minority party having any say. Finally comes Maine, a real doozy. The districts of Maine are drawn where District 1 represents the southwestern corner of the state and the northern part is District 2. The state legislature draws the map, but a 2/3 majority is needed to pass it, and the governor might veto it. Joe Biden won the state by 9% of the vote. Democrats got 16% more votes for their congressional candidates than Republicans. However, because Maine splits its electoral college votes, we know that Donald Trump won the 2nd congressional district. However, despite that, a Democrat won the 2nd congressional district. So despite the votes being there to support a Republican in one district with Donald Trump winning the second and getting that one electoral college vote, and despite the 9% difference in candidates, the Democrats still control 2 seats in Maine, which means that Maine gives the Democrats another 1% boost, even though there's really nothing that I can point to in Maine to show how they could do it any differently. Overall, using the formula that I came up with to determine if the representation is fair, we end up with Democrats having a 3-seat advantage after looking at the 2-seat states. This is because my formula is looking at how many districts worth of people are not being represented as they should be. So even though only one of these states is potentially guilty of drawing lines in an unfair and partisan way, we can say that many more people are not having their say because of how districts are drawn. But here's a spoiler alert. As we get into the larger states, we will see where the problem rests, and be it a 1 or 3-seat advantage now, it gets much worse later. And if you want to help stop gerrymandering and voter suppression, you can go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make a contribution. I've partnered with Levelfield, and they are helping me to use the tools the big players use to push for change. But I need your help to make it work. So go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and help me fight back. That's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. And please remember to smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you can know when my next videos are coming out. And also remember to tune into my live stream podcast, 8 p.m. Central every Wednesday, here on youtube.com/liberaldanradio.